The stars looked cold and distant as Admiral Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the battleship Indomitable Spirit. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. They all knew what was coming. Earth was gone. The colonies were burning. 3 billion humans were running for their lives in massive evacuation ships, trying to reach safety in the far corners of space. The Vorthon Empire had won. Their alien fleet stretched across the galaxy like a plague, destroying everything human. But the evacuation ships were slow and defenseless. They needed time. Someone had to buy them that time. That someone was the Indomitable Spirit and her small fleet of 12 destroyers. 13 human ships against 400 Vorthon warships. It was suicide, and everyone knew it. "Admiral," Captain So-young said, softly walking up beside him. She was young for a captain, only 34, but the war had aged them all. "The evacuation fleets have reached the jump point. They're starting the first phase now." Hyunwoo nodded. The evacuation would take weeks. Each jump carried the refugee ships further from Vorthon space, but they were still vulnerable. If the aliens broke through here at Kepler 442, they could hunt down the fleeing humans and finish what they started. "How long do we need to hold?" he asked. "Minimum 12 days, So-young replied. 14 would be better. Hyunwoo almost smiled. 12 days. The Indomitable Spirit was 50 years old, her armor patched from a dozen battles. Her weapons were outdated, her shields barely functional. Most of her crew were green recruits or old veterans like himself. Against 400 fresh enemy ships, they might last 12 hours. "Commander Taemin," he called to the engineering station. The young engineer looked up from his displays, sweat already beading on his forehead. "Yes, sir." "How are our reactors? Holding up?" "They're running hot but stable," Taemin replied. "I've got some ideas about overloading the magnetic containment fields. Might give us an edge if things get desperate." "Things are already desperate," Hyunwoo said. "Do whatever you need to do." Lieutenant Ji Hai at Communications turned around. "Admiral, I'm getting a transmission from the Vorthon fleet. They want to talk." "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the grotesque face of a Vorthon commander. The aliens looked like insects that had learned to walk upright. Their black eyes reflected no mercy, no understanding of human emotions. They had been conquering worlds for 1,000 years. "Human Admiral." The alien's voice was like grinding metal. "Your species is defeated. Surrender now and we will make your deaths quick. Continue to resist and we will hunt down every human in the galaxy. Your children will die screaming." Hyunwoo stepped forward. Behind him, he could feel his crew watching. Not just the bridge crew, but everyone on the ship. They were listening, through the internal comm system. What he said next would determine how they died. "I am Admiral Hyunwoo of the Terran Federation," he said clearly. "And I have a message for you. Humanity does not kneel. We do not surrender. And we do not run from things like you." The Vorthon commander's mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter. "Then you will die like the rest of your kind." "Maybe," Hyunwoo said, "but you're going to remember us." He signaled Ji Hai to cut the transmission. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Sergeant Dong Ho's voice came over the comm from the Marine quarters. "Admiral, the boys down here want you to know something. We're with you all the way to hell if that's where we're going." Similar voices started coming from all over the ship. Engineering, weapons, medical bay, fighter squadron. 500 voices saying the same thing. They would fight, they would die if they had to. But they would not give up. "All hands, this is the Admiral," Hyunwoo said into the ship's comm system. "Today we make our stand not for glory, not for medals, but for every human child on those evacuation ships. For every mother and father hoping to see tomorrow. We are all that stands between them and extinction." He paused, looking out at the enemy fleet. So many ships, like a swarm of angry wasps. "The Vorthons think they know us. They think we're just another species to be conquered. They're wrong. We are human. We are stubborn. We are mean when we're cornered. And today, they're going to learn what that means." The crew was ready. Captain So-young had moved to her tactical station. Commander Taemin was pushing the reactors to maximum power. Pilot Jae-sung was in his fighter. leading the last squadron of human pilots. Dr. Mi Young was in her lab, working on something she said might help. "Enemy fleet is moving," reported Ensign Boram from sensors. "They're spreading out to surround us." "Let them," Hyunwoo said. "The more they spread out, the easier it is to hit them. All ships prepare for battle. Target their command vessels first." The Vorthon fleet was massive, but it was also overconfident. They expected the humans to run or surrender. They weren't prepared for a fight. The indomitable spirit fired first. Her ancient plasma cannons lit up the void, striking a Vorthon cruiser dead center. The enemy ship exploded in a ball of fire. Around the battleship, the 12 human destroyers opened fire as well. Small ships, but fast and deadly. The Vorthons responded immediately. Hundreds of energy beams lanced through space. The destroyer, Braveheart, took a direct hit and vanished in an explosion of metal and flame. Then the steel wind was gone, torn apart by alien missiles. But the humans kept fighting. They used every trick they knew. Commander Taemin released electromagnetic pulses that scrambled Vorthon sensors. Pilot Jae-sung led his fighters through the debris, attacking larger ships from behind. Captain So-young coordinated the remaining destroyers, hitting the enemy where they were weakest. The battle had begun. The odds were impossible. The outcome was certain. But Admiral Hyunwoo stood on his bridge and watched his crew fight like demons. They were human. They were outnumbered. They were probably going to die. But they were not going to make it easy. The first hour was hell. Admiral Hyunwoo watched from the bridge as his destroyer fleet died around him. The brave heart was gone. Then, the steel wind. The thunderstrike lasted 3 minutes before a Vorthon dreadnought tore it in half with a single shot. But the indomitable spirit kept fighting. "Hull breach on deck 7, someone shouted. "Fire in engineering section C." "Seal it," Captain So-young ordered. "Damage control teams, move." The battleship shook as another enemy salvo hit her shields. The lights flickered. Emergency alarms were going off everywhere. But somehow, impossibly, they were still alive. "How are we still here?" Ensign Boram asked from her sensor station. She was young, barely out of the academy, and she looked terrified. "Because we're too mean to die," replied Chief Petty Officer Sun Ho as he ran past with a repair kit. The old veteran had been fighting for 30 years. He'd seen worse odds before. Down in engineering, Commander Taemin was performing miracles. The ship's fusion reactors were ancient technology, but he knew them like his own children. When the Seo, Vorthon weapons overloaded the main power grid, he rerouted everything through the backup systems. When the backup systems failed, he hand-wired connections that shouldn't have been possible. "Sir, I've got an idea," he called up to the bridge through his headset. "These Vorthon ships, they rely on bio-neural networks for targeting. If I can overload our reactors in controlled bursts, the electromagnetic pulse might scramble their systems." "Do it," Admiral Hyunwoo ordered. Taemin's hands flew over his controls. The ship's reactors began cycling in a pattern that made every engineer's textbook scream in protest. But it worked. A massive electromagnetic wave burst out from the indomitable spirit, washing over the nearest Vorthon ships. For a few seconds, the enemy fire stopped. Their targeting systems were blind. "All weapons fire now," So Young shouted. The battleship's guns blazed. Old plasma cannons and missile tubes that had been fighting for 50 years poured death into the confused Vorthon formation. 3 enemy cruisers exploded. A dreadnought lost its forward weapons, but there were still over 300 enemy ships left. In the fighter bay, pilot Jae-sung was preparing for another impossible mission. He was 24 years old and had been flying for exactly 6 months. Most of his squadron was already dead. Of the original 48 fighters, only 7 were left. "Listen up," he told his remaining pilots over the radio. "We can't win. Everyone knows that. But we can make them pay for every meter of space." His wingman, a young woman named Hyrin, laughed grimly. "Where do you want to hit them next?" "See that big ugly thing at grid 77? Jae-sung said, pointing at a massive Vorthon carrier. "I think it needs some holes in it." They launched into space, 7 tiny fighters against an armada. It should have been suicide. But the Vorthons weren't used to opponents who refused to act rationally. The fighters used the debris from destroyed human ships as cover, popping up to fire missiles before disappearing again. Jae-sung lined up on the carrier's engine section. His fighter was damaged, leaking fuel, but the missiles were still armed. He waited until the last possible second, then fired everything he had and rolled away. The Vorthon carrier shuddered as explosions ripped through its rear section. It wouldn't kill the massive ship, but it would slow it down. "Nice shooting," Hayren called out. "Thanks, now let's find another one." Meanwhile, in her laboratory, Dr. Mi-young was working on something that might change everything. She was a xenobiologist, an expert on alien life forms. She'd studied the Vorthons for years, looking for weaknesses. And she'd found one. "Captain So-young," she called the bridge through the intercom. "I need to talk to you. It's important." "Can it wait?" So-young replied. "We're kind of busy getting shot at up here. It's about how to hurt them, really hurt them." That got everyone's attention. A few minutes later, So-young was in the lab while Ensign Bo-ram took over tactical. "What do you have?" So-young asked. Mi-young pointed to her computer display. It showed the internal structure of a Vorthon ship, with strange organic pathways running through the metal hull. "Their ships aren't just machines," Mi-young explained. "They're part organic. The Vorthons use bio-neural networks to control everything, but those networks have a weakness." "What kind of weakness?" "Sound. Specific harmonic frequencies. If we can modify our weapons to produce the right sound waves, we can disrupt their entire nervous system. Not just the ships, but the crews inside them." So-young stared at the data. "How long do you need?" "Give me 2 hours and access to the weapons control systems." "You've got it." The battle continued to rage outside. The indomitable Spirit had lost half her remaining destroyers, but she was still fighting. Admiral Hyun-woo stood on his damaged bridge, watching the tactical display. They destroyed nearly 40 Vorthon ships. Not bad for a single old battleship. But it wasn't enough. There were still too many enemies. And his ship was falling apart. "Admiral," Lieutenant Ji-hai called out. "I'm intercepting Vorthon communications. They're frustrated." "What do you mean?" "They keep talking about how long this is taking. Their commanders are angry that one human ship is holding up their entire fleet. They're calling us the stubborn ones in their language." Admiral Hyun-woo almost smiled. "Good. Let them be frustrated." Every minute they spent fighting here was another minute for the evacuation fleets to escape. "Sir," Ensign Bo-ram reported, "I'm showing massive damage throughout the ship. Hull integrity is at 40%. We've lost main life support on 6 decks. Weapons are down to 60% effectiveness." "And yet we're still here," Hyun-woo said calmly. "Keep fighting." The ship shook again as more Vorthon fire hit home. But the old battleship absorbed the punishment and kept shooting back. Her crew worked like demons, patching holes, rerouting power, keeping the guns firing. In the medical bay, Corpsman Yoonji was saving lives that shouldn't have been saved. She was young, only 27, but she worked with the skill of someone twice her age. When the medical bay lost power, she operated by flashlight. When they ran out of proper medical supplies, she improvised with whatever she could find. "How's it looking, Doc?" asked a wounded Marine. "You'll live," she told him, bandaging a plasma burn on his arm. "Though you might have to explain to your girlfriend why you're missing part of your eyebrow." The Marine laughed. Even dying humans found ways to joke. The second day began with the indomitable Spirit still fighting, still alive, still making the Vorthons pay for every meter of space. And down in her lab, Dr. Mi-young finished her modifications to the weapon systems. "Captain," she called the bridge, "I'm ready to test the harmonic weapons." "Do it," So-young ordered. The battleship's next salvo carried more than just explosive death. It carried sound waves tuned to disrupt Vorthon bio-neural networks. The effect was immediate. 3 enemy ships suddenly stopped firing. Their lights went out. They began drifting helplessly through space. "It works," Mi-young shouted. "It actually works." For the first time since the battle began, Admiral Hyun-woo allowed himself to hope. They were still outnumbered. They were still probably going to die. But now they had a weapon that could hurt the Vorthons. Really hurt them. The battle was far from over. 3 days into the battle, the indomitable spirit looked like she'd been through hell. And she had. Her hull was black with burn marks. Half her weapons were destroyed. Emergency patches covered holes you could fly a fighter through. But somehow, impossibly, she kept fighting. Admiral Hyun-woo walked through the ship's corridors, checking on his crew. The artificial gravity was failing in some sections, making people float as they worked. The air recycling system was running at barely 50%. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows everywhere, but morale was actually getting better. "Sir," Lieutenant Ji-hai called from the communication station as he returned to the bridge. "You need to hear this. I've been monitoring Vorthon fleet. Communications and their commanders are starting to panic." She played back a translated conversation between 2 alien officers. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. "How is one human ship still fighting? We have lost 63 vessels to their weapons. The crews are becoming frightened. They speak of the ship that will not die. The Admiral wants this battle finished quickly. Use whatever force necessary." "We have been using whatever force necessary. Nothing works. These humans fight like demons." Admiral Hyun-woo listened to more intercepted messages. The Vorthons were calling the indomitable spirit by a name in their language that roughly translated to the stubborn death. Their crews were actually afraid to get too close to the human battleship. Broadcast. "This to the entire ship," he told Ji-hai. "Let everyone hear what the enemy thinks of us." The crew listened to the Vorthon communications with growing pride. They were winning something more important than the battle. They were winning respect. Fear. The aliens who had conquered a dozen species were scared of one old human ship. In the Marine quarters, Sergeant Dong-ho was preparing for another Vorthon boarding attempt. The aliens had tried to take the ship twice already, sending boarding pods to attach to the hull like metal insects. Both times, his Marines had been ready. "Listen up," he told his remaining men. There were only 30 Marines left from the original 100. "The bugs are coming again. Sensors show 6 boarding pods this time." Master Chief Wan-shik, a grizzled veteran with gray hair, spat on the deck. "6 pods? They're getting desperate." "Or smart," Dong-ho replied. "Either way, we know what to do. Turn every corridor into a killing field. Make them pay for every step." The Vorthons attacked again 20 minutes later, their boarding pods attached to the ship's hull with magnetic clamps, cutting through the outer armor with plasma torches. But the humans were ready. The first Vorthon soldiers to enter the ship walked into carefully prepared traps. Explosive charges hidden in the walls, automatic weapons firing from concealed positions, human Marines who knew every inch of their ship and used that knowledge like a weapon. The battle inside the ship was vicious. Vorthon soldiers were bigger than humans, with natural armor and razor-sharp claws. But humans were smarter, meaner, and fighting for their lives. In Corridor C7, 3 Marines held off 20 Vorthon soldiers for 40 minutes. When they ran out of ammunition, they used maintenance tools as weapons. Plasma cutters, welding, torches, whatever they could find. Corpsman Yoon-ji ran through the fighting to treat wounded Marines. She wasn't supposed to be in combat, but someone had to help the injured. She carried a med kit in one hand and a pistol in the other, healing humans and shooting aliens with equal skill. "Corpsman," a wounded Marine called out. He was lying behind an overturned table, bleeding from a claw wound across his chest. Yoon-ji slid across the floor to reach him, dodging Vorthon energy beams. "How bad?" she asked, already examining the wound. "Been better," the Marine said with a weak grin. "Can you patch me up enough to keep fighting? You should be in the medical bay. No time, my squad needs me." Yoon-ji worked quickly, sealing the wound with emergency medical foam and injecting painkillers. "You'll live. Try not to get any more holes in yourself." "I'll do my best, Doc." Down in engineering, Commander Taemin was fighting his own battle. The ship's reactors were running far beyond safe limits. Half the power conduits were melted. The main computer was held together with spare parts and prayer. "Sir," one of his technicians called out, "Fusion Reactor 2 is showing dangerous instability. We need to shut it down." "No," Taemin said firmly. "If we lose another reactor, we won't have enough power for weapons and shields. But sir, if it goes critical, then we'll deal with it. Keep it running." Taemin knew he was asking the impossible, but impossible was what humans did best. His engineering teams worked like demons, manually controlling systems that should have been automated, physically holding broken machinery together when the repair kits ran out. Chief Petty Officer Sunho was everywhere at once, leading damage, control teams through the ship. He was 45 years old and had been through 3 wars. He'd seen ships die before, but not this ship, not on his watch. "Hull breach on deck 12, someone reported over the intercom. "On our way," Sunho replied, grabbing his equipment. "Team 3 with me. Teams 1 and 2 keep working on the weapons array." They ran through corridors filled with smoke and flying sparks. The breach was bad, a hole the size of a door where a Vorthon missile had punched through the armor. Air was rushing out into space, taking anything loose with it. Sunho and his team worked quickly, welding emergency plates over the hole while wearing magnetic boots to keep from being sucked out. It was dangerous work, but it was what they did. In her lab, Dr. Mi Young was working on improvements to the harmonic weapons. The sound waves that disrupted Vorthon bio-neural networks were working, but they needed to be stronger, more focused. "Captain So Young," she called the bridge, "I think I can increase the effectiveness of our harmonic weapons by 30%, but I'll need to tie directly into the main computer system." "Do it," So Young replied immediately. Mi Young's fingers flew over her controls, rewriting weapons, software that had been in use for decades. It was delicate work. One mistake could disable their weapons entirely, but the potential gain was worth the risk. On the bridge, Ensign Boram was discovering she had a gift for tactical analysis. She was young and inexperienced, but she could see patterns in the battle that others missed. "Captain," she said suddenly, "I think I know why the Vorthons keep attacking from the same direction." So Young looked up from her console. "Explain." "Their formation is designed for fighting multiple enemies at once, but we're just one ship. They can't bring all their weapons to bear because their own ships are in the way. If we position ourselves here," she pointed to a spot on the tactical display, "we can force them to attack in smaller groups." So Young studied the data. The young ensign was right. "Admiral, we should adjust our position." Admiral Hyunwoo listened to the recommendation and smiled. His crew was learning, adapting, getting better at the impossible task of surviving. "Make it so," he ordered. The indomitable spirit changed course, moving to the position Boram had identified. Immediately, the Vorthon attack pattern shifted. Instead of facing 400 ships at once, they were now fighting groups of 30 or 40 at a time. It was still impossible odds, but it was better than it had been. "Sir," Ji-hai reported, "I'm receiving a message from the evacuation fleet. The first group has reached the safe zone. 25% of the refugees are now secure." Admiral Hyunwoo felt a moment of satisfaction. 25%. 800 million people safe because his crew had bought them time. But they needed more time. Much more. "How many ships have we destroyed?" he asked. 83 confirmed kills, So Young replied. "Maybe a dozen more too damaged to fight effectively." "And how many do they have left?" "About 250 active vessels. The numbers were still impossible, but they were getting better." Outside, the battle continued. Human weapons fired harmonic death at alien ships. Vorthon vessels exploded or drifted helplessly as their bio-neural networks failed. The indomitable spirit absorbed punishment that should have destroyed her 10 times over and kept fighting back. Inside the ship, humans worked miracles. Engineers kept impossible machinery running. Marines fought off boarding parties. Medical staff saved lives that couldn't be saved. And on the bridge, Admiral Hyunwoo stood watch over it all. His ship was dying slowly, piece by piece. His crew was exhausted, wounded, running on determination and stubbornness. But they were still fighting, still buying time for humanity to escape, still showing the galaxy what humans could do when they refused to give up. Day 7 of the battle found the indomitable spirit held together by little more than human willpower and emergency welds. Half the ship was dark, running on emergency power. The artificial gravity failed completely on 3 decks. The main computer had been replaced twice with backup systems that weren't designed for combat operations. But somehow, impossibly, she kept fighting. Admiral Hyun-woo made his daily walk through the ship, checking on what remained of his crew. Of the original 1,200 souls aboard, only 200 were still alive. Many of those were wounded, but they refused to give up. In the medical bay, Corpsman Yoon-ji was working miracles with supplies that should have run out days ago. She'd converted a storage room into an emergency surgery, using whatever she could find. When the proper medical scanners failed, she used handheld devices meant for engineering inspections. When the surgical tools broke, she sterilized maintenance equipment. "How are you holding up?" Admiral Hyun-woo asked her. Yoon-ji looked up from bandaging a Marine's broken arm. She had dark circles under her eyes and hadn't slept in 30 hours. But she smiled. "Still saving lives, sir, that's what matters." Behind her, wounded crew members were lying on stretchers, makeshift beds, even the floor. Burns, broken bones, shrapnel wounds. But they were alive, and many would heal enough to return to duty. "Sir," one of the wounded Marines called out, "Is it true we've been fighting for a week?" "It's true," Admiral Hyun-woo replied. "And we're still here?" "We're still here." The Marine grinned despite the pain from his injuries. "Those bug-faced aliens must be really mad at us by now." In engineering, Commander Taemin was performing what could only be called mechanical wizardry. The ship's fusion reactors were running on components that hadn't been manufactured in 20 years. Half the power conduits were melted and had been replaced with cables meant for completely different systems. "Sir," one of his technicians called out, "I don't understand how Reactor 3 is still running. According to every law of physics I know, it should have exploded yesterday." "Physics is just guidelines," Taemin replied, sweat dripping from his face as he worked. "What matters is making things work long enough to do the job." He was right. The reactor should have exploded. The power grid should have failed. The life support should have shut down completely. But somehow, through skill and desperation and pure human stubbornness, everything kept working. Up in the fighter bay, pilot Jae-sung was preparing for another impossible mission. Of his original squadron of 48 fighters, only 3 were still operational. His own fighter was held together with emergency patches and spare parts from 6 different destroyed aircraft. "Where are we hitting them today?" asked pilot Hayron. Her fighter was in even worse condition, but she refused to be grounded. "That big command ship at Grid 4-4, Jae-sung replied. "Intelligence thinks it's coordinating their fleet movements." "Intelligence also thought we'd be dead by now," Hayron pointed out. "Fair point. But we're not dead yet, so we might as well keep making their lives difficult." The 3 fighters launched from the damaged carrier bay, weaving through debris and enemy fire, to reach their target. It was suicide, everyone knew that. But it was also exactly the kind of thing humans did best. On the bridge, Captain So-young was coordinating the ship's defenses, while Admiral Hyun-woo dealt with a crisis in the weapons bay. The bridge itself was barely functional. Most of the displays were cracked or dark. The main tactical screen flickered constantly, but the crew made do. Ensign Bo-ram had become their tactical genius, analyzing enemy patterns and finding weaknesses. She was 22 years old and had been in combat for exactly 1 week, but she thought like a veteran. "Captain," she called out, "the Vorthan fleet is changing formation again. They're pulling their damaged ships back and bringing up fresh ones." "How many fresh ships?" So-young asked. "About 40. But here's the interesting part. They're not attacking immediately. They're waiting for something." Lieutenant Ji-hee, monitoring communications, suddenly looked up with alarm. "Captain, I'm intercepting a priority transmission from the Vorthan command ship. They're calling for special weapons." "What kind of special weapons?" "Planet killers, ma'am. They're so frustrated with us that they're bringing up weapons designed to destroy entire worlds, just to deal with 1 battleship." Captain So-young stared at the communications officer. planet-killer weapons against a single ship. It was almost a compliment, in a terrifying way. "Get me the Admiral," she said. Minutes later, Admiral Hyunwoo was back on the bridge listening to the intercepted communications. The Vorthons were indeed bringing up their most powerful weapons. Devices that could crack open moons were being prepared to fire at the indomitable spirit. "How long before they're ready to fire?" he asked. "Maybe 2 hours," Ji-hai replied. "And what's the status of the evacuation fleet?" 60% of the refugees have reached safe zones. The remaining 40% are still in transit. Admiral Hyunwoo did the math in his head. They needed at least 5 more days to get everyone to safety. The planet-killer weapons would end the battle in 2 hours. "Sir," Ensign Boram spoke, up hesitantly, "I might have an idea." "Let's hear it." "The Vorthons are so focused on us they're not paying attention to anything else. According to the intelligence networks, human resistance cells throughout their empire have been coordinating attacks. Dozens of slave species are rebelling, inspired by our battle here. What does that have to do with our situation? If we could transmit our position and battle status to those resistance cells, they might be able to launch coordinated attacks on Vorthon supply lines, force them to divide their attention." Admiral Hyunwoo considered this. It was a long shot, but everything they'd done for the past week had been a long shot. "Do it," he ordered. Ji-hee began broadcasting on encrypted channels that only the human resistance would know. The message was simple. The indomitable spirit was still fighting, still holding the line. If the resistance could strike now, it might force the Vorthons to pull ships away from the battle. Meanwhile, Chief Petty Officer Sun-ho was leading another damage control team through the ship's lower decks. A Vorthon missile had punched through the hull near the main reactor, and radiation was leaking into the crew quarters. "We need to seal this section," he told his team. "But the radiation levels are lethal." "How lethal?" asked one of the younger crew members. "Walk in there without protection. You'll be dead in 10 minutes, maybe 5. The young man looked scared but determined. "What about with radiation suits?" "We don't have radiation suits. They were destroyed 3 days ago." The team stood in silence for a moment, looking at the sealed hatch that led to the contaminated section. Beyond that hatch, radiation was slowly spreading through the ship. If they didn't stop it, everyone would die. "I'll go," Sun-ho said quietly. "Chief, you can't. I'm 45 years old. I've had a good run. The rest of you have families to go home to." He was lying about that last part. None of them were going home, but it made the sacrifice easier to accept. "Belay that," came Admiral Hyunwoo's voice over the intercom. He'd been monitoring the situation. "We don't sacrifice crew members unless there's no other choice. Find another way." Sun-ho smiled grimly. Even facing certain death, the Admiral was still trying to save every life he could. "Aye, sir. We'll find another way." And somehow, they did. Using remote-controlled maintenance robots and improvised shielding, they managed to seal the radiation leak without losing anyone. It took 6 hours and nearly killed the robots, but they did it. In her laboratory, Dr. Mi-young was working on one final improvement to their weapons. The harmonic disruptors were working well, but the Vorthons were adapting. Their newer ships had better shielding against the sound waves. "I need more power," she told Commander Tae-min over the intercom. "If I can route the ship's entire energy output through the harmonic system for just a few seconds, I might be able to create a feedback pulse that will disable every Vorton ship in the area." "How big an area?" Tae-min asked. "Maybe 100 kilometers radius. And what happens to our ship? Honestly, I have no idea. We might survive. We might not." Tae-min was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I'll start routing the power now." That was the thing about the crew of the Indomitable Spirit. They'd stopped worrying about survival days ago. Now they only cared about taking as many enemies with them as possible. The message came back from the resistance networks 12 hours later. Coordinated attacks were happening throughout Vorthon space. Supply depots were exploding. Communication relays were being destroyed. Slave worlds were rising up in rebellion. The Vorthon fleet commanders were getting frantic calls for reinforcements from dozens of worlds. Their perfectly organized empire was suddenly falling apart, and it was all because one human ship had refused to die quietly. "Sir," Jihai reported, "the Vorthons are pulling ships away from our battle. About 50 vessels are leaving to deal with the uprisings." It wasn't enough to save them, but it was something. Every ship that left was one less weapon pointed at the evacuation fleets. Admiral Hyunwoo stood on his damaged bridge and watched the tactical display. 200 enemy ships were still more than enough to destroy his battleship. The planet, killer weapons were almost ready to fire, but they'd held the line for 7 days. Day 12 of the battle dawned with only 97 souls left alive aboard the indomitable Spirit. The ship was barely recognizable as a warship anymore. Her hull was more patch than original armor. Half her decks were open to space. The bridge was lit by emergency lighting and the glow of fires that couldn't be put out. But she was still fighting. Admiral Hyunwoo stood at what remained of his command station, looking at the tactical display. The Vorthon planet killer weapons were charging up, massive devices that could crack worlds in half. In 30 minutes, they would fire, and the indomitable Spirit would become cosmic dust. Around him, his remaining crew worked at their stations. They were exhausted, wounded, running on stimulants and pure willpower. But not one of them had asked to surrender. "Sir," Lieutenant Jihai called out, her voice hoarse from days of continuous duty. "Message from the evacuation fleet. 85% of the refugees have reached safe zones. The last ships are making their final jump in 6 hours." Admiral Hyunwoo nodded. 85%. Over 2.5 billion human lives saved because his crew had held the line. It was worth dying for, but 6 hours was too long. The planet killers would fire in 30 minutes. "Captain So Young," he said quietly, "I want you to prepare for ramming speed." So Young looked up from her tactical console. She was young to be a captain, but 12 days of impossible battle had aged her beyond her years. "Sir, if we're going to die, we're taking as many of them with us as possible. Target the Vorthon flagship. Full power to engines and shields." "Aye, sir." The order spread through the ship. In engineering, Commander Taemin began overloading every system he could find. The fusion reactors, already running far beyond safe limits, were pushed even further. The ship's engines, designed for cruising speeds, were fed enough power to tear themselves apart. In the medical bay, Corpsman Yoonji was treating the last of the wounded. There weren't many left to treat. Most of the crew was either dead or working, despite their injuries. "Doc," asked a young technician with a bandaged head, "is it true we're going to ram their command ship?" "That's what they tell me," Yoonji replied, checking his bandages one last time. "Good. I was getting tired of running away from those ugly bugs." Yoonji smiled despite everything. Even facing certain death, humans found ways to joke. In what remained of the fighter bay, pilot Jae-sung was preparing his fighter for one last mission. It was the only fighter left operational, held together with spare parts and hope. "Where are you going?" asked pilot Haerin. Her fighter had finally given up the fight, too damaged to fly. But she was still alive, still ready to help however she could. "I'm going to clear a path for the ship's ramming run," Jae-sung replied. "Take out their defensive guns if I can. That's suicide. So is what we've been doing for 12 days, hasn't stopped us yet." Haerin helped him check the fighter's systems one last time. The small craft was a wreck, but the weapons still worked. The engines would hold together long enough for one last flight. "It's been an honor flying with you," she said. "Same here. See you on the other side." In her laboratory, Dr. Mi Young was making final adjustments to the harmonic weapon system. The sound waves that disrupted Vorthon bioneural networks had been their most effective weapon. But she had one last trick to try. "Commander Taemin," she called engineering, "I'm ready to try the feedback pulse. It'll require every bit of power we have left." "How long do you need?" Taemin replied. 30 seconds, but it has to be perfectly timed with the ramming run. You've got it." The ship shuddered as more Vorthon fire hit her failing shields. They were running out of time. On the bridge, Ensign Boram was coordinating the final attack. In 12 days, She'd grown from a frightened academy graduate to a skilled tactical officer. Now she was planning humanity's last desperate gambit. "Admiral," she reported, "I've plotted the optimal course to the Vorthan flagship. We'll have to go through their defensive screen, but if we time it right with the harmonic pulse, we might make it." "Might isn't good enough," Admiral Hyunwoo said. "We have to make it. Too much depends on this." The final preparations were complete. Every surviving crew member was at their station. The ship's weapons were loaded and ready. The engines were building up to ramming speed. "All hands," Admiral Hyunwoo said into the intercom. "This is the Admiral. In a few minutes, we're going to do something that's never been tried before. We're going to ram a ship 10 times our size while every system we have is overloaded beyond the breaking point. It's impossible. It's insane. It's exactly the kind of thing humans do best." He paused, looking around the bridge at his crew. These people had followed him through hell and never once complained. "I want you all to know that. Serving with you has been the greatest honor of my life. You are the best of humanity. You are what we're fighting for, and after today, the galaxy will never forget what humans can accomplish when they refuse to surrender." The crew listened in silence. Then Master Chief Wan Shik's voice came over the intercom from damage control. "Admiral, the crew has a message for you. We're proud to serve under you, and we're ready to show these bugs what humans are made of." Admiral Hyunwoo felt tears in his eyes. These people were about to die for an ideal they believed in. There was no greater courage than that. "Lieutenant Jihai," he said, "open a channel to the entire galaxy, all frequencies. I want everyone to hear this." "Channel open, sir." Admiral Hyunwoo straightened his uniform one last time and spoke into the communications array. His words would be heard by humans fleeing through space, by alien resistance fighters hiding on conquered worlds, by Vorthon commanders who thought they'd already won. "This is Admiral Hyunwoo of the Terran Federation battleship Indomitable Spirit. For 12 days we have held this line against impossible odds. We have bought time for our people to escape. We have shown the galaxy that some things are worth dying for." His voice carried across the void, reaching every corner of known space. "Today the Indomitable Spirit makes her final voyage. We go not in defeat, but in defiance. We are human. We do not break. We do not yield, and we will never be forgotten." He nodded to Captain So Young. "All ahead full, ramming speed." The ship lurched forward, her engines screaming at maximum power. The Vorthon fleet opened fire with everything they had, but it was too late to stop them. Pilot Jae-sung launched his fighter, diving into the enemy formation to clear defensive guns. His small craft took hit after hit but kept flying, kept shooting, kept making a path for the battleship behind him. Commander Tai Min pushed the fusion reactors beyond every safety limit. The ship's hull began to glow from the energy coursing through her systems. Power conduits exploded and were immediately bypassed. The engines ran so hot they started to melt their own casings. Dr. Mi Young activated the harmonic pulse at exactly the right moment. Every watt of power the ship could generate was focused into a single devastating sound wave that tore through the Vorthon bioneural networks like a scream of pure destruction. The enemy defensive screen faltered as ships lost control, their crews stunned by the harmonic attack. The Indomitable Spirit smashed through the gap, her hull glowing white-hot, aimed directly at the massive Vorthon flagship. On the bridge, the crew stood at their stations, watching death approach at the speed of light. The tactical display showed the distance to target shrinking rapidly. 5 kilometers, 3, 1. "It's been an honor," Captain So Young said quietly. "The honor was mine," Admiral Hyunwoo replied. The Indomitable Spirit struck the Vorthon flagship at nearly 20% the speed of light. The impact was visible from 3 star systems away. Both ships vanished in an explosion that lit up the void like a newborn star. The harmonic pulse, amplified by the ship's destruction, rippled outward through space. 23 more Vorthon ships lost power and drifted helplessly. The flagship of their mighty fleet was gone, taking with it their supreme commander and most of their tactical staff. The remaining Vorthon fleet, shocked by the loss of their command structure and the impossible courage they'd just witnessed, began to retreat. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Vorthon Empire had been stopped by an inferior force. The indomitable spirit was gone, but her sacrifice had saved humanity. 50 years later, Captain Jin Ho stood on the bridge of the new battleship Indomitable, Spirit III, looking out at the memorial that marked where the original ship had made her final stand. The monument was simple, a metal sphere containing pieces of wreckage from the first ship, surrounded by the names of her crew. "Tell me about them," asked Ensign Young Mi, a young officer just out of the academy. "They were ordinary people," Jin Ho replied. "Engineers and pilots and Marines. They were scared. They knew they were going to die. But they refused to give up because billions of lives depended on them. And it worked. The Vorthon Empire collapsed within 5 years. Dozens of species they'd enslaved rose up in rebellion, inspired by the story of one human ship that wouldn't surrender. The galaxy learned something that day. Tyranny has limits. There are some things worth dying for." Young Mi stared at the memorial. "Will we ever have to do something like that?" "I hope not," Jin Ho said. "But if we do, I know we'll be ready because we're human. We don't break, we don't yield, and we never forget those who came before us."